A brief introduction. Dr. Ravi passed out from Madras Medical College, Madras University, did his MD from JIPMER in 1983. Importantly, he started the neurovirology department at NIMHANS in 1985, a good 35 years ago, when this was a very nascent department, nascent specialty. He has just recently retired as the head of Department of Neurovirology of NIMHANS. He has varieties of interest, outbreak investigations, development of indigenous diagnostic, acute encephalitis, pathogens and immune response to viral infections, HIV. He has published over several papers in peer-reviewed journals, including chapters in textbooks, monographs. He has a patent on cysticercus cellulosis. He has done a lot of work in ELISA and HIV, mentored 25 PhD students, and he is a visiting professor of microbiology, University of Liverpool since the year 2013. The COVID-19 task force member, Government of Karnataka, ICMR mentor for COVID testing labs, served as an expert member for various task forces in scientific advisory committees of the WHO, Department of Biotechnology, DST, ICMR, you name it, and viral institutions across the country and the globe. He is awarded the Sir C.V. Raman Young Scientist Award by the Government of Karnataka, Eminent Medical Virologist Award of Indian Virological Society, elected Fellow of National Academy of Medical Sciences, FIMS in 2009, very prestigious award for any medical professional, and Distinguished International Fellow of American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Dr. Ravi also has an interesting hobbies, cooking, conducting quiz, and writing rhymes. Today, he's not going to talk to you about rhymes. He's going to talk to you about a very important and topical subject, COVID-19. The talk is on challenges and understanding COVID-19. With great pleasure, introducing Professor Ravi Vasantapuram, and more importantly, very dear friend and colleague over 35-40 years. Ravi.
Thank you, Sundar. Good evening to everybody. I am very thankful to the Karnataka Golf Association for having me to address them. And what I will do in the next 30-35 minutes is try and share some information, knowledge, and some personal experience. Before I start, let me start with a disclaimer. SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus. We are all learning. Everybody is learning. So the whole scenario is dynamic. So sometimes information which was valid today may not be valid tomorrow. And there is limited information. So we are all trying to work with that limited information. I'll use only information from authentic sources. I will not use information from social media, especially the world's largest unregulated university known as WhatsApp. What I will do in the next 30 minutes is to organize my presentation in terms of giving a brief introduction, what lessons we have learned, and then dwell on challenges and opportunities in 5 domains. In terms of epidemiology, what are the challenges and opportunities? Clinically, laboratory testing wise, in terms of socio-behavioral challenges and opportunities and prevention, and end with a summary. Where do we stand in 2020? The last century has seen the rise of many viral pandemics and outbreaks. Over a century ago, we had the Spanish flu, which killed about 50 million people across the globe, and it raged for several years. And then we had several viral infections. You can see the tombstones depicted in this picture. West Nile, the flu came in many varieties like the Hong Kong flu, the Asian flu, the Russian flu, Ebola, HIV, which is still going on as a pandemic, has killed over 30 million people. Then we've had Nipah. Then we have had the coronaviruses causing major disease for the first time in 2002, 2003, which is the SARS virus. We're fortunate we didn't get it to India. And then the MERS, its cousin, which emerged in 2012, 2013. And of course, the more recent one is the uh, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. In between, we had the large outbreak of swine flu in 2009. What do we know about coronaviruses? These are viruses that have RNA as genetic material. You all know in high school biology, you were told there are two types of genetic material, DNA and RNA. DNA is found in all higher animals, whereas RNA is found in the lower life forms such as viruses. Prior to the emergence of this COVID-19 virus, we already had experience with 6 other coronaviruses. 4 of them used to cause mild flu-like symptoms and diarrhea between 1960 and 2002. Then came the first severe acute respiratory syndrome, known as now the SARS-CoV-1, which was again a problem in many countries. Fortunately, India was spared. In 2012, we had the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which emerged in the Middle East. And then, of course, that also did not come to India. The name corona is given because on the left, you can see a cartoon of the virus. It is spherical, measures between 60 to 150 nanometers in diameter. And on the surface, it has projections, much resembling the crown of a king. That's why the corona. These viruses are widely distributed. They exhibit genetic diversity and are found in human beings, animals, and birds. COVID-19 is the name of the disease, while severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, is the name of the virus that emerged a year ago in China. Now, why do these viruses emerge? I'll spend a few minutes on it. The natural reservoir of coronaviruses are bats and rodents. The minor coronaviruses have been harbored in rodents and they have spilled over to human beings, whereas the severe ones all have come from bats. Now, these we call in technical language spillover events. What is a spillover? When bats, animals, and human beings come together in a crowded place, in a closed space, bat viruses can be transmitted to humans either directly or through an intermediate host. SARS-CoV-2, the intermediate host was a civet cat, whereas for the MERS coronavirus, it was the camel, and for the SARS-CoV-2, it is an anteater known as pangolin. Now, how did this spillover occur? This spillover occurs because human beings, being selfish in their nature, repeatedly ravage viral corridors. They live in their own niches and corridors. I would invite all of you to read this wonderful book called Dancing Matrix, which explains how spillover occurs. Remember, viruses live in birds, animals, plants, and in human beings. So we have to learn to respect the environment, and we have to learn to respect other life forms. Now let's look at the next slide, which will tell you why spillover occurs. These are pictures from Southeast Asia of wet markets where all sorts of animals, birds, and every living creature is sold in crowded closed spaces where human beings also crowd in a large numbers. This is presumed to have originated from Wuhan wet market. There's no surprise because Wuhan wet market had all sorts of animals that were being sold. So this is one of the primary reasons. And as long as we continue such a thing, believe me, every 5 years you will get a new virus emerging. Where will it emerge from? Where this interface of human beings, birds, and animals occurs are in three continents. One is Asia. It could be China, it could be Vietnam, it could be any part of Southeast Asia. Africa, because of its jungles and primates and a large number of animals. And then, of course, South America, which has the thickest jungles, especially the Amazon forest. So we can virtually predict when the next pandemic will occur. In 4 to 5 years, from 2000, turn of the century, we have had 5 viruses emerging from animals to human beings. Other than this factor, I think there are many other factors one has to remember. Political factors, whenever there is unrest, Rwandan refugees, because of unrest, went through Zaire and got Ebola in 1995. Wherever there is increased social contact with animals, wherever there is economic impoverishment or war or civil conflict, you can expect indiscriminately constructing dams, giving a dam to environmental conditions. You have examples using economic reasons like the food production to make cows fatter. People have fed remnants of sheep slaughterhouse material, which is known as offal. The cow is a vegetarian. You had mad cow disease. There are innumerable examples, and this is not the forum to talk about it. Maybe I can talk about it later. So basically, human beings are responsible for emergence of viruses. Coming back to SARS-CoV-2, it's a spherical virus. It's a simple structure. It has an outer envelope. On the left, it is depicted as a blue circle. Embedded in the envelope is a very important protein known as spike protein. The shape of the spike protein is very much like the common pin that we use in our stationery. It has a head and it has a stem. Now, inside this envelope is encased a shell, which is made up of nucleoprotein, and the nucleoprotein protects a single long strand of viral RNA that encodes for all viral proteins. In medical terminology, we say it's a positive stranded virus. To put it in simple language, if you introduce this genetic material into any cell, it can immediately produce viral proteins because it is positive stranded. Remember this, when I come to vaccines, I will tell you how important it is. Having said that, the most important protein is the spike protein, and it has a head and a stem. In the head, it has one particular domain which is enlarged, that is responsible for binding to human and animal cells. This is called the receptor binding domain, or RBD. And this particular domain is the one that gives protective immunity, because the virus uses this part of the protein to unlock human cells and animal cells. So all protection as far as the virus is concerned is invested in this particular protein. Almost all vaccines are targeting this protein. In the next slide, I will tell you that the virus enters human cells using a blood pressure control protein, which is known as angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is the receptor for the virus. The virus specifically attaches to this receptor. This receptor God did not create for viruses, but it is part of our normal physiology. It is used to control human blood pressure. Now, this is present in almost all parts of the human body, as shown in this cartoon. Highest amount of receptors and density is found in the human gut, the testis, the kidney, It's also found in a moderate level in liver, lung, heart, blood vessels, brain. You name it, every organ has receptor, which means SARS-CoV-2 can infect any of these cells that have the receptor. We all know the transmission. Transmission is mainly through droplet. Although initially there was a lot of hue and cry about surfaces and aerosol transmission, we now know that human to human contact is the most efficient method of transmission, and people who have symptoms transmit the disease more. I will show you the data. And of course, if surfaces are contaminated and immediately within a few minutes, if you touch the surfaces and then touch your nose, you can still get the infection. Above all, remember 3 C's. Wherever there are crowds, wherever there are closed spaces, and wherever there is close contact without maintaining a distance of 3 to 6 feet, there will be high transmission. It's good news for KGA. If you want to play golf, the risk of transmission is less, provided you maintain your social distance and you always play outdoors and don't start playing, devising a game of golf indoors. Masks are the only protection to prevent droplets from entering the nose and the mouth. N95 is a mask that protects, gives 95% efficiency. That is the most efficient mask. Triple layered surgical masks also work, and triple layered cotton masks also work. Remember one point about masks, they can be used only for 6 hours, after which the moisture in the breath will make the mask wet. And once there is water on the mask, it acts as a vehicle to carry virus from outside to inside. So mask cannot be used eternally. I will tell you what I learned in epidemiology of COVID-19 in Karnataka during a very controlled period known as lockdown, when everything was controlled, people were under observation. This is a map of Karnataka, which we made end of May. It's a heat map. Heat map means it depicts the proportion of cases. When the color is red, high number of cases. When the color is green, very few cases or no cases. You can see at that time between March and May, Bangalore was the hub. You also had it more in the southern districts, one coastal district, and in the northern districts. Most interestingly, 90% of the people during that time were asymptomatic, 10% were symptomatic. It was a more disease found in males as compared to females. But what is more important is to tell you how the disease was transmitted in groups, which we call as clusters. Now, what you see, this beautiful Rangoli here, is a cluster diagram. What is a cluster? More than 5 or 10 cases where the source was one patient, we have defined as a cluster. You can see many clusters and you can see two colors, yellow and red. Red means people who had symptoms. Yellow means people who did not have symptoms. At a glance, you can find out that large clusters in the periphery, the ring that you can see, are huge clusters. That means one patient in the center was responsible for transmission to all these peoples. Now, the clusters on the periphery all have a red dot in the center, meaning a person who has symptoms is the one who was responsible for a large amount of transmission. There are many clusters which have only yellow. They also, there is transmission, but it is much lower. Mathematically, I'm showing you in this table, we analyzed 46 large clusters. 32 had in the center of the cluster a symptomatic person, whereas 14 clusters had asymptomatic people in the center. These 32 people gave it to 545 people. 87% of the 83% of the transmission was from symptomatic people, and 17% was from asymptomatic people. On an average, you can see a symptomatic person can give it to 17 people, whereas an asymptomatic person can give it to a maximum of 8 people. Now, this is not rocket science, it's common sense, but remember, common sense also requires evidence. I'm happy to inform Sundar, just 2 days back, this has been accepted in Lancet. How does SARS-CoV-2 produce disease? Generally, we all believe that viruses multiply, destroy human cells, and because of the destruction, you will get disease. True. But the contribution of this particular direct virus-mediated damage in COVID is very less. Most often in COVID, more than 70 to 80% of people, disease is because of their own aggressive defense mechanism, which is shown as mechanism number 4 in the right extreme. It is a dysregulated defense response. That means some people mount a very aggressive defense mechanism, resulting in the lungs getting flooded with fluid. Where air is supposed to be there, if there is fluid, then the people cannot take in oxygen, and that's how they develop severe acute respiratory distress syndrome and die. Another mechanism which we are realizing in the last few months is virus multiplies in the lining of the blood vessels. It destroys the lining, attracting platelets to form clots. Now, these clots in a post-COVID syndrome are producing heart attacks, are producing strokes, are producing pancreatitis, are producing skin manifestations, are producing renal manifestations. So as you can see, majority of the people who get disease don't blame the poor virus. I've been an advocate for viruses in the last decade. I've stopped being an advocate for human beings. I love them because you can at least control them in the lab. The father of microbiology said this very beautifully on his deathbed 400 years ago. He said, the germ is nothing, the soil is everything. Meaning that don't attribute all disease to viruses, but to human beings who are also responsible. We have, of course, done molecular epidemiology of COVID-19, high sounding term. Basically, we have sequenced more than 110 genomes, and we have identified 6 different variants circulating in Karnataka. The commonest one was something that was found in many parts of Asia, which came to Karnataka through a religious congregation attendees from Delhi. I'm telling you this because right now my lab is doing sequencing for the so-called scary UK variants, which when we did this study was definitely not there in Karnataka. Whether it is there or not there, we will know in the next 24 hours. If you look at the clinical spectrum of COVID-19, fortunately, 80 to 85% of people have very mild symptoms or no symptoms. If at all they may have a little fever, running nose, maybe a dry cough, and they recover. The serious forms of disease involves breathlessness, respiratory arrest, and we have also found that in the last 4 or 5 months, people who have also reporting unusual symptoms like loss of smell and loss of taste. And very interestingly, people who report loss of smell and loss of taste, for some reason, do not go on to develop severe disease. Whereas people who develop diarrhea more often develop a more severe form of disease. On the right, you can see a cartoon showing all the organs in the human body. Today, if we know COVID, we know medicine. We don't have to go back to medical school to learn all subjects. With one virus, you can learn all subjects. Most of the people who develop severe forms of the disease develop at the end of 7th or 8th day. So if there's nothing that is developed in 7 days, that means that's good news. We detect COVID infection by detecting the viral genetic material, and that is shown in the form of a curve here. On the x-axis, you can see the weeks. On the y-axis, you can see the amount of material that you can detect in the lab. Viral genetic material can be detected 1 or 2 days before onset of symptoms, and it can be detected up to 14 days normally in people. In some people, genetic material can linger on in dead cells for up to 42 days or even 60 days. But that's very, very rare. 95% of the people will be negative for PCR by day 21. Antibodies, or the body's reaction to the virus, usually can be detected at the end of second week and best detected at the end of third or fourth week. But there is a proportion of people who will not develop antibodies, and this is anywhere between 10 to 20%. In those people are the people we suspect that it is some other form of immune response that is working, which we call a cell-mediated immune response. Remember, there is no laboratory test that is 100% foolproof, that is yet to be devised for any disease. The PCR has a sensitivity or accuracy of 90 to 95%, provided the sample is collected properly and it is collected between the 5th and the 7th day after virus enters the human body. Earlier it can be negative, later it can be negative. We also have antigen test, very rapid. In half an hour you'll get report, but it can detect only 50 to 60% of cases. So if it is positive, no need for PCR. If it is negative, you definitely need PCR. Going on to the human defense system, there are two types of defense system. One which is present always but does not have memory. It's an immune which we call as innate. Innate means it's inborn. It is present for all viruses. It is the first line of defense. It is found in the linings of the nose. It's found in the lungs, in the throat. If that innate system does not work, then the specific system or the adaptive immune response kicks in. There are studies to show that there are people who have those are the people who go on to develop severe disease, do so because in the initial step itself, the innate system reacts aggressively and leading to flooding of the lungs. A beautiful study showed that this happens in SARS-CoV-2 compared to other viruses that are known to cause pneumonia, like the common flu virus. Most of the people develop antibodies, and antibodies are developed usually in about 14 days. Now, this is a chart that's showing you how antibody titers increase. X-axis shows you the level of antibody, and the y-axis shows you the number of days after onset of symptoms. As you can see, as time progresses, by 2 months, most people develop antibodies, but 11% had not developed antibodies at all. Now, these 11% were followed up for a long time. In that, again, another 11 to 15% did not develop antibodies. So some people will not develop antibodies. That's not a surprise, although we do not know why it is so. There is no specific treatment to kill the virus. All treatment is directed to reduce and to kind of modulate the aggressive response. Usually we give steroids, we give some monoclonal antibodies directed against some immune reactants. The two drugs that are used, antivirals, are not directed against SARS-CoV-2. Remdesivir is a very useful drug. It was developed for Ebola virus, but it has a very small window. When oxygen saturation is between 95 and 85, at that time you give it, people do very, very well. If you miss that window, remdesivir is useless. Favipiravir is a swine flu drug that also, if it's given very early, it can suppress virus multiplication but does not kill SARS-CoV-2. People have tried plasma from recovered people as a therapy. The randomized trials did not show any benefit, but it left a message saying that individual doctors can use it because in some it is useful, in some it is not useful. So we do not know whom to give. The best decision is left to the clinicians. COVID has probably activated the vaccine industry maximum, and 184 vaccines are in the pipeline, of which about 11 or 12 have reached various stages of clinical trials, and you know already about 4 have been approved for human use, emergency authorization, 2 in US and 2 in UK. Now, India is going to probably give emergency authorization for 1 or 2 vaccines before the new year end. So probably by Shankaranti, we will have vaccines rolled out for healthcare workers. India has worked out a plan. In 3 phases it will do it. The first phase will be for healthcare workers. The second phase will be for elderly with comorbidities or anyone with comorbidities. And the third stage will be for general public. Moving on to the challenges and the opportunities. There are several challenges, and I've listed 5 here. Epidemiological, meaning public health challenges, clinical challenges and opportunities in terms of diagnosis, socio-behavioral, and prevention. I would draw your attention to this wonderful report that was published in May by the World Economic Forum. I think if you have the interest, you should read it. Broadly, the challenges I have summarized in this slide. In terms of public health, the biggest challenge is to track people who are infected, to trace them and test them. It's a huge task. Yes, we managed to do it well. Now again, the system is activated with UK returnees coming back. People are going helter-skelter to try and track. I was told about 100 people have still not been tracked. Those who landed in Bangalore or Mangalore airports from UK in the last 20 days, 100 people are yet to be tracked. Remember, if you have to keep the activity down, you have to keep the positivity rate less than 5. Mathematically, that means for every positive patient, for good surveillance, you should be testing 20 contacts per positive subjects. That is 5%. Arithmetic tells you that 5% means 1 in 20. For every positive person, at least 20 contacts should be tested. In terms of clinical challenges, I'm happy this challenge has been converted into an opportunity. We did not have adequate number of beds. 40% of district hospitals in this country did not have ICUs, and 60% of ICU beds did not have piped oxygen. Now, what a wonderful opportunity COVID has given. We have ramped up all these in the last 6 months, and at last, I am very happy to say that we have a decent level of healthcare at the secondary level. There is no antiviral drug, and of course, COVID has given a challenge of rapid clinical trials, RCTs, to come into place. Social challenges have been enormous. The biggest has been the panic. In the last 1 week, you would have seen the amount of panic channels are creating over the UK variant as if the doomsday has landed. Remember, the UK variant is a variant that has only one property that is different from what was the earlier COVID virus, and that is its transmissibility or its ability to spread is more because of certain mutations. Other than that, it is not more virulent, meaning it does not cause more severe disease, and all treatments and vaccines currently being used will be effective against that variant also. Fear of quarantine and isolation, especially stigma and discrimination, was rampant at the peak. Now it's much better. COVID infected people had various kinds of manifestations, denial, anger, depression before they accepted it. Mental health has come into focus thanks to COVID. There's so many helplines that came up, and people required to be counseled for being alone, isolated, and at home. In terms of prevention, for the first time in our lifetime, we've been told we have to maintain distance between people, we have to wear mask. Now, these are huge behavioral challenges, and we are still trying to cope with it. Of course, now a vaccine has come, and one great challenge in prevention was to protect the vulnerable, especially the elderly. We know that this is a disease that causes severe manifestations in elderly. Youngsters have to be more responsible. In terms of opportunities, as I already said, use of technology has come in a big way to track and trace people. A large number of apps, Arogya Setu, Quarantine Watch. It's also provided, kept public health people busy to look at data and drive interventions rather than empirical decisions to be taken. And it has provided a lot of importance to change our curriculum so that public health comes into the center. Look at clinical opportunities. Upgradation of healthcare facilities, I told you. Telemedicine is a new form of consultation that COVID has provided an opportunity. And adopting and implementing uniform guidelines across the country for a disease. We never did this. And we never had such aggressive training. The online platforms have provided a great opportunity. And of course, rotation of workforce in clinical setting. Work for 1 week, take off for 1 week. And lastly, of course, a country that has had so many other systems of medicine, here is an opportunity to, to combine with the allopathy and develop good evidence base for the traditional systems of medicines. In my own specialty of testing, we have been told that we have to use minimum testing and derive maximum intelligence. And personally, the year when I retired, medical council imposed a regulation that every medical college shall have a virology lab. I think that's the happiest moment of my life, that when I started, I was alone in Karnataka. Now every medical college has a virology lab. In terms of social opportunities, I think at the end of this pandemic, whenever it occurs, health administrators and politicians will learn a lesson to allocate more resources. We allocate 40% of our GDP for defense. Now, come on, this is biological war. We should be investing more in health, more for this. A meager 1 to 2% of GDP will not be enough. You require at least 10%. Let us hope if COVID does anything, it will increase health budgets. And I also mentioned to you why viruses emerge. I think we have to start inculcating this concept of one health in children. We teach history of wars, history of independence, mythology. We teach geography, but we never teach children about emergence of viruses, how they spread, why they spread. I think these are important concepts to be introduced into curriculum. We know that yoga has been around for hundreds of years and it reduces stress. It has a great role to play in modulating the immune response. So yoga is a wonderful tool. And also, we for the second time after swine flu, we are learning that our communication has to be directed to behavior change. And believe me, having worked with HIV and swine flu, I can assure you that fear based messages, judgmental messages are not going to work. There are many mental health professionals here on this. I can see Sundar, I can see Sangamitra, all of them know this better than me. That fear based messages is not the way forward. And of course, mental health services are very important, and COVID has brought that to the forefront. In terms of prevention, as of now, till the vaccine rollout occurs, there are only three W's. I told you there are three C's which can get you infection: close spaces, crowds, and close contact. If you don't want the infection, you need the three W's: watch your distance, wear a mask, wash your hands frequently. And from our own experience, globally, we have conveyed the message that hunting down people who have symptoms and isolating them and testing them early prevents the chain of transmission, and you can curtail. And many factories for whom I have been an advisor, they are using a risk matrix on how to get workforce back to the factories. In summary, we are dealing with a virus that is new. No one other than those who are infected at this stage are immune. Maybe in 6 months, those who are vaccinated will be immune. As I see it, with my experience, transmission will continue to occur for a long period. Virus is here to stay. So we have to emphasize on social vaccine, which is distancing, mask wearing, and avoiding crowds. We should engage in positive messaging. We should learn to protect vulnerable populations. There's enough data to say that elderly with comorbidities are the highest risk. And what we need is a harmonious integration of allopathy and other systems of medicine. And also, we need to use evidence based research methodology for any intervention that we want to impose or introduce. Four books have made my life and have influenced me a great deal for those book lovers. One I already mentioned, Dancing Matrix by Robin Marantz Henig. It talks to you beautifully about how viruses live in their own niches and corridors. Viral Storm is a great book which tells you how we should be dealing with pandemics in future using technology to quickly converge on where it occurs. My favorite philosophical book is Alchemist, which carries a message, very important message, that when you want something, and if it is not only for you, it's for the larger good, the entire universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. And of course, the last book by my dear classmate and very dear friend Abraham Varghese, My Own Country, written on his experience working with AIDS people. The punchline of that book is there is more to AIDS than the virus. Ladies and gentlemen, there is more to COVID than the virus or virologists. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy.
First of all, thank you very much, Ravi. I'm sure a good number of people from KJ who are fortunate to listen to you have understood a lot more than what they did in the last nearly 1 year. As you said, WhatsApp University has produced several people with MPhil, PhDs, and recently I've shared a few with postdoc. Knowledge is exponential, and the large amount of fake knowledge is much more attractive and much more alarming. And just as an aside, you mentioned about Lancet, accepting a paper. For those of you in the non-medical field, to get a publication in Lancet is one's life's ambition. And incidentally, Ravi, I've had a couple of them way back 30, 40 years ago. So, and there are a few questions that have come. I'm going to read it out to you. I see Dr. B.C. Rao there saying an excellent talk. For those of you who, everybody knows in KG B.C. Rao. Ravi, you probably know Dr. B.C. Rao, one of the foremost family physicians in the city, and he doesn't compliment people easily. I know that very well. So B.C. Rao says, excellent talk, which is fantastic. Now, the first question is from Anita Mahadevan. Nothing is a naive, Anita. Everything is an important question. virus infects endothelial cells and there is a viremia. So why is blood not a good sample for PCR? Ravi?
Okay, the viremia in COVID is very minimal and it can be detected only in those who have severe infection. I showed you a pyramid. The pyramid says only 5% go into severe infection. 80 to 85% are asymptomatic. In them, it does not cross the lung or the capillaries in the lung to go into the blood. But without viremia, it can produce minor, massive microvascular clots in the lung, which many people develop, and also in the heart, leading to heart attacks, and also in the brain, leading to strokes. Over.
Thank you, Ravi. Prerna Tandon. In this kind of pandemics, is there a formal end that is declared? Can you declare an end of the war, viral war? If yes, how far are we away from the end point in COVID-19? Very uh, pointed question, Ravi, you're the one to answer.
Maybe 2022, because vaccination will come in a big way in 2021, and with vaccination will come herd immunity, and then there will be low level transmission going on in the community for those people who have not received the vaccine. So by 2022, my guess is that the pandemic will be declared as over. If we are lucky, halfway or three-fourths through 2021, also it may be declared. Remember, once 60 to 70% of the population is either protected or infected, the susceptible pool is less, so the number of transmissions will be less. So it would not come in large numbers. Right now, you can see that it is still very high numbers, especially in the Western countries, as compared to India. India has been reporting in the last 4 weeks only 20 to 30,000 total new infections every day, whereas the other countries are reporting much more. So I think the pandemic will be declared over, in my opinion, by late next year or definitely in 2022.
Ravi, as a side question to the earlier question, if the pandemic numbers are coming less, are we ready to, is it time to relax? Or you should still be on a war footing about being careful? Because there's something which people, I keep hearing people telling me, doctor, the numbers are coming down, so things can be back to normal. I don't think so, but I would like to hear from you.
Yeah, I would like to tell you based on absolute. We conducted the first large scale survey of COVID burden in Karnataka in September, between 2nd September and 14th September, which is popularly known as Zero Survey. But we did it differently in Karnataka. We did not only look for antibodies, but we also looked for virus. And our studies on an average showed 30% of the state's population has already seen the virus. But we peaked in October and we came down in November. So my guess is we would have hit 50%. Or wishfully thinking we would have hit 60%, let us say. That's why the numbers are less. The flip side of the coin is, Sundar, 40% are still not infected. You let your guard down, you will have a second wave. History tells us that there will be a second wave, God forbid, but second waves usually occur between 3 to 5 months after the first wave. All it needs is one or two few super spreading events. God forbid, the number of people attending marriages, number of people attending crowded places, number of people attending parties, it worries me. So if at all a second wave occurs in our state, I predict it will be between January and March. So don't let your guard down. Nothing has gone away. The virus is still there. It is waiting for an opportunity. And now comes the UK variant. which if it enters the state can be transmitted much more easily. So I think all the more we should be patient and careful for another 3 months. Over.
The message is loud and clear. Ravi, can a person who has been infected with virus, say COVID positive, quarantined, mild, moderate, recovered, can they get infected again? Is something which people asking.
Yes, it's very rare though. I know of half a dozen of my people whom I have known. My own physician who was treating me got reinfected. And those
And
people who are likely to get reinfected are those who have not developed neutralizing antibodies. And neutralizing antibody detection is not easy, it's a very cumbersome test. But we also know that people who get mild infection first time get severe infection second time, and vice versa.
goodness,
People who
goodness
got
me,
severe infection first time are likely to get a milder infection second time. Over.
this is only a postulation.
No, this is clinical observations.
Oh, I see. So one has to be cautious all the time. So
Exactly.
Kalpana is asking, how long would antibodies infected patients last against the virus?
We know they last for 6 and now maybe in some individuals 8 months, because that's the age of the entire virus and its interaction with human beings. The good news is majority of the people develop antibodies. 90% will develop antibodies. And the emerging evidence says in the remaining 10 to 12% who do not develop antibodies, they seem to develop cell-mediated immunity. And that is encouraging news that has been coming in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Over.
Okay. Any advice on building immunity?
Immunity building, it's become an industry. So I don't want to go to the industry. Let me put facts in front of you. Vitamin D, through many studies, unequivocally through RCTs, has been shown to be a great immunomodulator. It promotes protective responses. Vitamin D is a vitamin that we get through certain types of food and through sunlight. Unfortunately, many studies have shown that the exposure to sunlight, unlike our childhood, now we don't get so much sunlight. We are all in indoors. So one needs to definitely take vitamin D as a supplement. It usually available as sachets. And vitamin D is definitely recommended. Number two, vitamin B12 is also very important for immune responses. B12 comes from certain types of foods, number one. Number two, B12, as you age, that portion of the intestine which absorbs B12 atrophies. So you will require extra supplementation. Now, these two vitamins and zinc as an element are very important in mounting a good immune response. Now, wherever you get this, you can take it. There's no harm in supplementing. There are schedules for vitamin D supplementation, and there are schedules for B12 supplementation and for zinc supplementation. I don't have the time to go and give a prescription for everybody, but these are the three essential nutrients that govern a protective immune response. All
Thanks,
others,
Ravi. You have actually told.
all others, there is no objective evidence. My grandmother gave me Chyawanprash, so I will take Chyawanprash because it's not toxic. Whether it protects against COVID, God only knows. Over.
Thanks, Ravi. You have actually encouraged golfers to go and play more golf, spend time in the sunlight, vitamin D, absorb it, and do not come to the clubhouse and congregate in large crowds. I think that's a message because you don't want to undo what you have achieved during 4 or 5 hours of golfing. Come back if you want to sit in the clubhouse, keep the distance, masking. People do not do that. I don't think they should be lax on that. Will the vaccine weaken immunity? As is what I've been reading. Is that true?
No,
Somebody says that. Prerna. Answer is no.
no. The answer is
It will not weaken immunity. Okay.
There's also another question I see from
Yeah.
Anita Mahadevan.
Correct.
Reason for increasing number of cases of post-COVID mucormycosis?
Yes, it came a report. Yeah.
The honest answer is we do not know, but I suspect it has got to do with the mucosal immunity being altered post-COVID because of the type of scarring it produces. But that is only an armchair theory, but there is no evidence for it. Yes, there has been increased number of mucor. Another question which says antibodies for one strain of COVID protect against another strain. We believe so because the neutralizing antibodies once produced will protect against all strains. But the worry is that when the virus mutates too much, especially in the spike protein, whether it will protect. Already vaccine manufacturers are tinkering with their vaccines to see that it is more broad in its neutralizing response.
Thank you, Ravi. It's 8 o'clock. I think past 8, the talk has been exhilarating, informative, and clarified several doubts on members of KGA. I think I would like to thank Karnataka Golf Association, the office bearers, and especially Prithviraj Ars, who have made it possible. When I heard Dr. Ravi, I've known him, as I said, for several years. When I heard him recently for a session, we gave it to all our staff members at Richmond Fellowship and the families. And it was so useful. I told Prithvi immediately, I think we must have a talk for the members, because after the two common topics amongst golfers is golf and COVID. I think the better hear from the expert. So I thought we'll request Dr. Ravi. He has been extremely busy, believe it or not, even several committees, both nationally and internationally. Every time I call him, he said, Sundar, they call me Sundar. He said, I'm in a Zoom meeting, I'm just finishing. I'm going into the next meeting. I think post-retirement has become busier. No wonder, because the excellent speaker, people have knowledge, but very few people know how to convey it succinctly. Ravi is an expert. Thank you very much, Ravi, on behalf of everybody and on behalf of KGA, and we'd love to thank you. Surely, I will invite you with some of our friends to join us for a meal at KGA, and we'll make sure we'll keep the distance to make sure everybody is kept safe.
And you'll keep your promise of teaching me golf. That's
absolutely. There you are, Prithvi. Prithvi is listening. Committee member is there. He wants to hit a few balls and join golf post-retirement. That'll be a good thing to do. Get a lot of sunlight. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, KGA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye.